I am Jean-Marie Guéhenno, professor of practice at the Salzman Institute and the director of the Kent program, both at School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. And it is my great honor to welcome Lakhdar Brahimi today for a conversation on Afghanistan. I can't think of anybody who is better qualified to discuss the present situation in Afghanistan, to discuss Afghanistan. Lakhdar Brahimi, distinguished Algerian diplomat, but also a wonderful civil servant at the United Nations, who helped Haiti, South Africa, and Afghanistan, among other places, has been involved in Afghanistan since, I think, 1997. Exactly. So that's almost 25 years. And without further ado, I'm going to ask him a few questions, and then I will open up for the audience. And my first question is really about why we are where we are now, because Afghanistan, in most of the 20th century, was a country at peace. But now it has been at war for roughly 40 years. And so there is this image of a country that can only know war, but that has not been always the reality of the country. But why today is it so difficult to reach peace?
Greetings to you, Jean-Marie, and to your students and other participants in this conversation. I'm honored and very pleased to have been invited, and I hope that this conversation will be of interest to everybody. You know, Afghanistan, yes, was mostly at peace in the 20th century. I'm not sure how it was in the 19th century, but you see, it's a tribal society. It was a tribal society, very quarrelsome, but they knew how to fight and they knew how to make peace. They had local mediators, very, very experienced, very able, mostly people who were enjoyed, who gained the respect of the communities for one reason or another, mullahs, elders. They knew how to manage quarrels amongst themselves. In 1964, there was the king, very, very highly respected man, Zahir Shah, introduced a modern constitution. I think that constitution was accepted. I think it was careful. It wasn't revolutionary, but it certainly introduced major changes in how the country wanted to administer itself and develop itself. 1964, it was in the framework of the Cold War. Afghanistan was courted by both the Soviet Union and the United States, but I think they were doing well. The prime minister in 1973, a cousin of the king, staged the coup d'etat. That is 1973. That is where I put the destabilization, the beginning of the destabilization of Afghanistan. He sent cleverly officers to be trained in the Soviet Union and in the United States. The officers in the Soviet Union did not come only with military skills. They came also with political ideas. So they staged a coup against him, killed him, and established a communist regime. That was followed by the arrival of the Soviet Union, the Soviet troops in end of 78, 79. And the 40 years of very unstable Afghanistan started there.
So, in a way, the international environment was a big part of the destabilization of Afghanistan, and still is.
Very, very much, very, very much, regional and international. As a matter of fact, you see, foreign military intervention in the modern times, yours and my time, is seldom effective and useful. So the Soviet intervention really destroyed much of what Afghanistan was. And then the American intervention did a lot of good. I mean, not the military intervention, but the international community helped Afghanistan develop in many, many, many ways. But still, it's not good enough, because although we always speak of Afghan-owned processes, it wasn't quite the case. And at the end, you see, it has taken us where we are.
So in 2001, as the Taliban regime is collapsing under the attacks of the United, with the military intervention of the United States, you are appointed by Kofi Annan as a special representative for the United Nations, and you have an immensely difficult job, because there is no government, and you have to create a process. You have to create some measure of legitimacy. And at the time, there had been other big interventions of the United Nations. There had been Kosovo. There had been Timor-Leste, where essentially the United Nations took over. In Afghanistan, you choose a very different path. Can you give us some insights on your thinking at the time?
Of course, I was following what was happening in Kosovo and Timor-Leste. I had, if you like, a kind of ideological attitude. And that is that, I used to tell Sergio that, why were you the dictator in Timor-Leste, and also before that in Kosovo, while the leaders the local leaders were your advisors? Why wasn't it the opposite? Why weren't the national leaders the dictators, and you were their advisor? The relationship is about the same, but it is terribly important. If you look at the Bonn Agreement, I think you will not find one time when it is said the UN will do this, that, or the other. It's always said the UN will help the Afghans do this, that, and the other. So that was an ideological attitude from my part. You have got to put the locals at the head of the process from day one, not from, and that is what we try to do in implementing the Bonn process. The thing is, as you said, there was no government. The Taliban had been routed. They disappeared from Kabul and the big cities. And there was a very simple question that we refused to ask, as an international community. Some of us did ask the question timidly. Where did the Taliban go? Where are they? You see, there was 300, 400,000 of people who occupied different positions in the, I killed the telephone ringing.
Now we hear you well, we don't see you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you will see me in half a minute. Okay. So that question, where have the Taliban gone? We didn't ask. We didn't ask because the international players that were around me were unanimous. America, Russia, Iran, India were unanimous. Forget about the Taliban. They have disappeared, they are gone, they will not come back. That was probably the biggest mistake that we have made. 1 year later, you remember I distributed something that became known as the Brahimi non-paper, in which I said that we've done great. We've achieved many, many things, practically implemented everything we were set to implement. But surely it is worth now stopping and looking back. What have we done? Haven't we made some mistakes that need to be corrected? Because of the achievements we made, isn't it necessary to amend a little bit our way forward? And there again, the international players were not interested. And the Taliban did not take a long time to reappear in the scene. They appeared in the form of groups fighting against the new dispensation that was set up. And they haven't stopped until today, when they are in charge of the country.
But the international community was against their participation, and obviously, I imagine later the Northern Alliance, the people who were in the room, were also very much against it.
Absolutely, absolutely. You see, some people now say, why weren't the Taliban in Bonn? They couldn't be in Bonn because they have been defeated, routed. The Americans wouldn't have allowed them to be invited, and I think if we invited them, they wouldn't have come. But immediately we went back to Kabul, end of December 2001. We should have asked this question: where are the Taliban? And by where are the Taliban, what are they thinking? And now I hear that they actually took the initiative, some of them, not Mullah Muhammad Omar, certainly, but some of them took the initiative of writing Karzai, saying, look, we just want to be, we'll accept the new regime if we are allowed to go back to our villages in dignity. Karzai said it's not true, but I suspect it was true that they have written to him, but probably Rumsfeld, who was the czar of everything in Afghanistan on behalf of America, must have told him, forget about it. Anyway, he never shared this news, this information with me at the time. So, and as you said, I should have indicated that not only the foreigners, but also the Northern Alliance, who were the masters, were made the masters. They had been defeated roundly by the Taliban, and they were funded, dressed in new clothes, and armed by the Americans and their allies and put in charge. They didn't want. They were also saying, Taliban are gone, forget about it.
And in Bonn, there was also a question that is indirectly related to the Taliban, which is the question of amnesty. And that could have killed the talks if there had been a provision. So it wasn't there. It was pushed to the Afghans. But then the Afghans voted a law later where they amnestied themselves, but not the Taliban.
As a matter of fact, nobody was thinking of the Taliban. The Afghans who were participating, there were only 35 participating in the Bonn discussions. They wanted in the Bonn process a blanket amnesty for themselves. They came back again when we discussed the constitution, and they wanted again. And we refused to be part of that because, as you know, the United Nations refuses to be part of this thing. But as soon as they were elected, they had their parliament, then they voted an amnesty for themselves, but naturally not for the Taliban.
And do you think that sort of double standard is a factor also in the problems of Afghanistan?
You see, the factions that were fighting against the Russians and then started fighting against one another, kind of, the Taliban was a movement of the foot soldiers during the struggle against Russia, who revolted against their leaders because they had indeed become, unbearable. So, as a matter of fact, practically everybody in the Mujahideen system was against the Taliban, or the Taliban were against them. And the Taliban defeated them all. So the Taliban was the movement that was not part of, that shouldn't have existed as far as the Mujahideen were concerned. So, yeah, this is, both the foreigners and also the Northern Alliance, of course, were having a political attitude, but the foreigners did not understand. We, the foreigners, I include myself, we didn't understand how important it is to make sure that, reconciliation, if you are talking about reconciliations, you don't talk about reconciliation of this between the 7 movements that were fighting against the Russians, but everybody, and in particular, the people who controlled when we went to Afghanistan, controlled 95% of the country. And you say these people don't exist, and we are building a new Afghanistan with everybody else except them. That was a major mistake.
But then you had the emergency lawyer Jirga and then the constitutional lawyer Jirga, and most observers think that the constitutional lawyer Jirga was not perfect, but it was nevertheless a remarkable achievement.
Yeah, yes, it was.
When you look at it, what would you have done differently? Or would you have done anything differently? I mean, do you have any regret on what was then agreed?
No. The constitutional lawyer Jirga, we had a very big battle with foreign constitutionalists, professors, who all came with ready constitutions for Afghanistan. And we insisted that it is Afghan-led. It was very complicated, very difficult. Quite a few people, in the drafting group that wrote the draft of the constitution were not up to, but it was a great, exercise for the Afghans themselves. And then we had 500 delegates picked up from all the country, and they discussed very, very seriously. And we were, 1 inch away from a collapse of the whole thing. But they had a lot of confidence in the United Nations. As a matter of fact, they said publicly, we have more confidence in the United Nations than in our political leaders. And one day they came and told me that, we can vote now. I said, if you vote now, what kind of majority do you think you have for the text as it is now? Said 55, perhaps 60%. I told them in Sweden that would be a landslide. In Afghanistan, it's not a majority, because you will be leaving out 40%, probably entire communities. So it's not good. So they went back and worked, and then at the end, there was near unanimity for the text that was adopted. So that was a very good exercise. But now, when I look back, the 1964 constitution, which we had stripped in Bonn of its monarchical articles, could have served Afghanistan very well for 20 years. So we took a risk, as a matter of fact, for going for a constitution that early. So now I would advise anybody doing this kind of work not to rush into writing a new constitution unless you have to. Constitution is between people who are really, looking together for a foundation of how they were going to live and work together. When you do it, one day after the end of the fighting, people are still have their knives in their hands. Total lack of mutual confidence. In South Africa, they discussed their constitution for 5 years. 4 or 5 years after the election. That's how you get constitution that is fairly acceptable to a large majority, a near unanimity of the country. That's an extremely important point from my point of view. Don't rush into writing a constitution when peace is still shaky, as was the case in Afghanistan.
Give yourself time. I remember you saying, if you want to hurry, go slowly.
Absolutely. That is a very important.
Now we come to the international presence in Afghanistan, which you are known as a supporter of what you've called the light footprint. But in Afghanistan, the presence has been anything but light, both on the military side and on the civilian side. And when you look at those 20 years with a massive military presence and a massive civilian presence, and what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are the following. There is something called the Swedish Committee in Afghanistan. That's a committee put up by Sweden, in Sweden, funded 50% by the people of Sweden and 50% by the government of Sweden. They had 700 local staff, doctors, architects, engineers, agricultural engineers, and things like that. And a lot of teachers. They had 700 local employees. It was run by 20 Swedes. And the number of those 20 Swedes actually went down before I left to 15. They were there, from I think 1985 or something like that. We had 700 local employees and the United Nations family, all of them, 700. But the internationals, where I don't remember now, 200, 300, something. That is definitely not necessary. And when the Taliban took over and the UN took out all its internationals and left only the national staff, the national staff did extremely well. Practically, they worked as well, if not better, than when the internationals were there. So I think that's my argument for the light footprint. The problem is that we had in Afghanistan, internationals were not coordinated. You had ISAF, which was authorized by the United Nations, military group, and the American Army, American, French, British, and so on, that were independent of either. And also you had, the Norwegians were running their own humanitarian, the Swedes, everybody was doing their thing. India was very big. India and Iran were very big. So there wasn't one international presence, several international presences. Yeah. The United Nations also had and have today different organizations running, getting together and trying to coordinate and so on, but having their own, each one having their own thing. I tried to bring us together. There are a couple of people who are angry with me until today. The car repair. So, we have a lot of cars. So the place where we is run by foreigners. So I used to say, look, there are a lot of cars in Afghanistan. They are not maintained by foreigners. Surely there are Afghans who can maintain it. It took 2 years to Afghanize the, I don't know, the garage of our cars. So, I still maintain that you don't throw people at problems. You try and work out solutions to problems and get the people that will implement those solutions. Don't throw people there and then try and find something for them to do in the framework of your solutions. That, I think, nothing I have seen changes my mind that this is the right position.
In Afghanistan, the two big failures that are often mentioned, especially here in the United States, is the failure of the security sector reform. There was a surprise that the Afghan army, on which so many efforts had been put, collapsed so quickly, and the massive corruption in Afghanistan as a key element in the collapse of the Afghan administration.
It's not only in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, it's everywhere. The international community has gone. Americans probably more than others, but I think we seem to create conditions for corruption. I have no answer on how you can avoid that. I know one thing. The most important thing you can do really in a country that is coming out of conflict is help them create a system, a rule of law. A rule of law. That means justice. A justice department that is strong and clean. A police, a national police or local police, or anyhow, people who are in the streets trying to keep order. That is also competent and clean. For that, you need to pay good salaries. That is, and you need to take extremely harsh measures against anybody who puts his hand in the purse. The best place to look for how it can be done is Singapore. They pay extremely good salaries. In our area that we know, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Secretary General is paid probably $500,000 a year or something, or more. But he is there for 2 or 3 years if he performs. Otherwise, he will be fired. So Singapore is certainly a very good example of what needs to be done. You can't give a policeman a gun and pay him a salary that will not feed his kids. You know, he will have to use his gun to get food on the table. Yeah, but this is not, I have no solution. I'm just drawing attention to the fact that, you know, you create systems that are, you know, responsible or contribute greatly to creating the environment that will produce corruption. What happened with the army and police and so on, why they collapsed? Khalilzad is speaking very much about that. I'm sure that there will be a lot of discussion in academia and in the media in the United States, probably more than anywhere else, about what happened. The negotiation with the Taliban. The only thing I would venture to say is that, in fact, Khalilzad was given his mandate to negotiate with the Taliban after President Trump has decided to leave. So, you know, we're leaving. That's finished. So now see how you can make that happen in the best possible conditions. But he was determined that you know, to leave, as a matter of fact, before the election, before his attempt to be re-elected. Khalilzad has done his best. The Taliban, I think, you know, again, something important. The Taliban had a strategy that surprised everybody. They had a very good military and political strategy, and that led them to the result that they have achieved. The government was divided, very, very divided, and probably did not read the reality correctly. And that surprises me very much. Ashraf Ghani knows Afghanistan, or knew Afghanistan extremely well. He thought that, you know, his military was strong, solid, trained, motivated. They were all that, but they probably were not motivated as much as he anticipated.
Now, where do we go from now? Do you think that there is a high risk that Afghanistan slips back into war, or is there going to be a peace under Taliban rule? And what is the role of the international community to support a scenario of peace rather than resumption of war?
Look, I'm much too far from reality of things in and around Afghanistan to have strong views. But I have a feeling, it's just a feeling, personal feeling, that the Taliban and everybody else have maybe 1 year during which to put something viable in place in Afghanistan. And something viable has to take into consideration the fact that Taliban have a lot of support in the country. But they have to realize that not everyone in Afghanistan supports them. And that there are a lot of people, and not only all politicians, that there are a lot of people who don't support them at all. If they don't understand that, if on the other hand, the international community and the people who are in the government and around the government don't understand that the Taliban do have support, then everybody is going to be in trouble. I also give a lot of importance to the neighbors, and in particular, Iran, India, and Pakistan, in reverse order of importance. Most important is Pakistan. The second is, I don't know, India or Iran. These three countries have got to accept together at the same time that peace in Afghanistan is in their interest. If they think that war in Afghanistan is in their interest, then it will be extremely difficult. And that is why, in my very naive thinking, I would see China, Russia, the United States working on these three countries so that they join them. Because I accept that Russia, China, and the United States think that peace in Afghanistan is in their interest. They should convince these three countries that peace is in their interest. The Russians are very close to creating something similar to the 6+2. I think that we should now, not the 6+2 that I created in 1997, but to the perhaps 6, which are the neighbors of Afghanistan, plus the 5 members of the Security Council, the permanent members of the Security Council, plus India. These are the people that should get together and speak to the Afghans, telling them, you are going to get our support for peace. You are not going to get our support for war.
But you mentioned Pakistan, and there are many people today who say that this is essentially a victory of Pakistan, and that they can hope that the Taliban will that Taliban friendly to Pakistan, the Haqqani network, will rule Afghanistan, but that can create divisions with other Taliban, the more local Taliban of Kandahar. Is that a possible scenario of division?
First of all, I have absolutely nothing I know tells me that Pakistan has really drafted and managed this victory of the Taliban. Maybe it is true, maybe it is not. But what I say here is, please be careful. Don't say that the Taliban are incapable of doing this alone. Maybe the strategy was drafted and done and invented by Taliban. If you know that it is done by Pakistan, yes, why not? That could be the case. What we see now, again from this far distance where I am sitting, is that the Taliban are already quarreling, divided. The temptation of the neighbors is to support one faction against the other. But that will just precipitate the return to war, not only between the Taliban, but in the country. There already are tiny little groups of resistance against the Taliban. So, now India, Iran, other countries may be tempted to support this, while Pakistan is attempted to support Taliban so that they remain alone in charge of Afghanistan. I think that would be catastrophic and terribly unfair to the people of Afghanistan. Terribly, terribly unfair, because it will take them back to wars, but certainly it will impose a lot of sufferings, more and more sufferings than there exists now in Afghanistan.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the discussion to questions. I think there is a question from Catherine Yusko. Maybe you can, she can join us. Yes, go ahead. Oh, you are muted.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Mr. Brahimi.
You are muted.
No longer, no longer.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We're good? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Brahimi. I just wanted to ask if you see a future peacekeeping operation in Afghanistan at any point.
Probably not peacekeeping operation, definitely not today or tomorrow or next week, but certainly a strong presence of the United Nations is needed and urgently needed. The convening power of the UN is unparalleled. Nobody can bring people together. You see, I mean, this group I'm talking about of these countries, I think they will all come if the UN is the convener. You know, Jean-Marie knows better than me about peacekeeping operation, but I don't think that's in the cards anytime, you know, in the near future. But a big role for the UN, yes, definitely.
Yes, I as a former peacekeeper, I agree with Lakhdar Brahimi. I think first you need the political conditions, and so if the kind of agreement can be reached between the powers that Lakhdar Brahimi mentioned, then maybe down the road there could be something, but it's the political agreement today that is that should be the priority. I think I have another questions, but I'm asked. I will ask a question on behalf of Paul Schaffner. What is a realistic path forward in Afghanistan to try to protect, to safeguard human rights and protect minority groups?
Yeah, not easy. Not easy at all. But you know, there again, please keep in mind that I know quite a bit about the past, but very little about the present. You know, I think here what is important to remember is that Afghanistan has changed. You know, we have a tendency to still think of Afghanistan as the tribal society it was in the 19th and early 20th century. I mean, look at all the shocks that have taken place in Afghanistan. Constitution of 1964, coup d'etat of 1973, coup d'etat of the communists, the invasion by the Soviet Union, the defeat of the Soviet Union, the government of the Mujahideen, the government of the Taliban, Bin Laden, 9/11, and 20 years of the Islamic Republic, that universities, television stations, telephone now everywhere. That is not the Afghanistan that the tribal Afghanistan that we knew. And I think the people who have got to understand that more than any others are the Taliban. The country they are governing now is not the same that they governed in the 1990s. How will that, you know, foreigners can help. Okay, they can help a lot. They can also put a lot of pressure in a lot of ways on the Taliban, but they cannot do it. You know, they cannot do it alone. You know, the American University in Kabul, they are doing a tremendous efforts trying to continue to teach in Kabul and getting as many students as possible outside and teaching them, through Zoom and other electronic ways. But that is, that has limits. What you need is to keep Afghans at home, but keep them at home in an environment that is reasonably acceptable. And so the Taliban have to be convinced that they cannot rule Afghanistan the way they ruled it in the 1990s.
I have another question from Sarana Wong, who asks about the question of legitimacy in Afghanistan. How do you build legitimacy, and which groups are to establish this legitimate government of Afghanistan? What is their source of legitimacy in today's Afghanistan?
Of course, the Mujahideen had the best source of legitimacy in the early 90s. They had liberated the country from the Russians or the Soviet Union, but they wasted that in no time. So legitimacy is not how to acquire it only, but also how to keep it. The Taliban, will claim legitimacy because they have been fighting a war. They will tell you that it's not a civil war; it is a war against foreign occupation. Be that as it may, they have won, and they think that this victory is a sufficient source of legitimacy. But I think the person who asked the question, and me and you, Jean-Marie, know that it is one part of the legitimacy, but it's not enough. If they want real legitimacy, they have got to make sure that the majority of the people of Afghanistan are happy to have them as a government, even for a time. It is not the case for the moment.
I have another question from Emmanuel Cousin, who says she certainly agrees that neighboring powers, including Iran, India, Pakistan, should be granted more agency in peace negotiations in Afghanistan. But she asks you, as a mediator, how do you manage the risk that these stakeholders complicate the negotiations by advancing their own vested interest, sometimes at the expense of local Afghans? How do you balance including neighbors and at the same time making sure that the Afghans in the end are running their own, deciding their own future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm a former mediator, not. What I'm saying really is that these countries. I mean, let me be blunt and perhaps a little bit unfair to all three of them. They have been fueling the wars in the past by providing weapons, money, training, what have you. What I am saying is that they have got to realize that was wrong, and that an Afghanistan at peace is much better to all three of them. India is afraid of Islamic extremism in Afghanistan that will converge with Pakistan and harm them. Pakistan is looking for what they call strategic depth. Iran is looking for I don't know what, but they have been fueling the conflict, not helping resolve it. What I'm saying, it's maybe very naive, is that they have to realize, and be helped to realize by their friends, Russia, China, and the United States in particular, but others also. I mean, there is certainly a role for France, for Britain, for Arab countries, who are also near neighbors. They have got to be convinced that peace is in the interests of everybody. And the Taliban themselves have got to be convinced that they have to make peace with their people, with the people who do not support them, who do not share their ideology, and accept that, Afghans can still be very good Afghans, but not share their ideology. So I am preaching rather than, providing solutions. But you cannot not include neighbors in and get them to be satisfied that what is happening, what is taking place in the future that you are building is acceptable to them.
Well, in Bonn, you managed to get the neighbors to have, around Bonn, not to sabotage the negotiation that you were conducting, but at the same time, you kept them at a safe distance from the.
Absolutely, even physically, if you remember, even physically, I took advantage of the hotel disposition, and there was one part of the hotel where only the UN and the Afghans had access. All the others were there. We had 26 countries represented with us in that hotel, Petersburg. We kept the Afghans and ourselves, and no foreigner except the United Nations attended the discussions between the Afghans. Because if somebody who receives money from Iran, if Iran is in the room, he will be talking much more to the Iranians than to his Afghan friends. So that we did, and I think it was a good initiative.
I have some more questions, but we're running out of time. One from Shakib Asrar. Do you think the US government is doing enough to help the Afghans both back in the country and those it assisted in evacuating?
I know a little bit about the evacuation. A lot of individuals and groups outside of the government have spent a lot of money getting people they knew out of the country. But the United States is not allowing anybody in the United States. So they have taken them to other countries. I believe that Albania and Kosovo are countries where quite a few, but also Uganda and other African countries where there are Afghans now waiting for their paperwork to be finished and go either to the United States, that's where they most want to go, or other countries. That is a very, very serious problem. I'm sure that the Americans have every reason to be careful, but surely these are people who worked, mostly people who worked with them or close to them. They cannot be left in Kigali or Uganda forever. The paperwork have to be speeded up for those people. But again, it's not a very good sight to see the best trained, the best educated Afghans running out of the country. That is the responsibility of the Taliban. They have got to do much more than they are doing to reassure their people that they can stay. They can stay at least with their dignity and respect to their ideas, their thinking, their ideology. That's different from theirs. But the Americans are certainly doing great deal. But the circumstances are such that whatever they are doing and others is not enough.
Yeah, you are raising a moral dilemma for the international community there, because indeed, when refugees are leaving to save their lives, the decent human thing is to welcome them. But at the same time, it's terrible if a country is drained of all its people who have been educated.
It is a terrible dilemma, Jean-Marie. I'm not blaming anyone, government or individual, who is taking people out. What I'm saying is that, you know, if you encourage people out, if you take them out, if you pay for them to leave Afghanistan, you don't take them to a third country.
No.
You know, you don't encourage people who want to go to America. Said, yeah, go ahead. You know, we'll take you to Kigali for a little bit. I mean, that little bit has to end. That's all I'm saying. What I'm, you know, again, speaking as a preacher and not as anybody else, it is heartbreaking to see these people who have been trained, and you know, they are needed now more than ever, and the responsibility of their leaving is mainly on the Taliban. So there, I'm really telling the Taliban, please make sure that people stay and not leave. They do pay lip service to this. They do say, you know, Afghans should stay at home and so on. But they have got to do a little more than that to convince their compatriots that staying is all right.
Yeah. There's another moral dilemma, which is about humanitarian aid. At the moment, the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan is very bad. But there are a number of countries which are wary of giving too much recognition to the Taliban. What is your position on that?
You know, the pledges that have been made recently, was it in Geneva, have not been delivered. Because of this, you know, we deliver them. What are we doing? There is, as a matter of fact, an old dilemma there. When the Taliban and other factions were fighting, international aid helped them not to care for the well-being of their people. They were being taken care of by others. That's also a dilemma. You know, you are against the war, and yet you allow the warring factions to spend all their resources on fighting while their people are taken care of. That's a dilemma too. You know, I suspect the Taliban may be counting on the fact that your tender heart is such that you will feed their people on their behalf without them making any concessions. I will not. I think I suspect that maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that there are at least a few of the Taliban who think that way. That's wrong, morally and politically wrong.
Well, I think we are coming to the end of this very rich conversation, and I want to thank you on behalf of the audience who cannot clap in the virtual world, but I want to thank you very much for giving us your time and wisdom to discuss a country that we all care about, and we hope will manage eventually to find peace. So thank you very much, Lakhdar.
Thank you very much, Jean-Marie, for inviting me. It has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you very, very much indeed. And I'm thankful also to your students and other participants in this discussion. Thanks a lot.